Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Oz Table Talk. My name's Luke. I'm at the table with Dave, Ore, and Catalina.
Hey.
Welcome.
Hey, hello.
Yeah.
Good to have you back finally.
I know. How long has it been? Do we even know?
I've got no idea, but you were at your other house.
Yeah, I've been here for at least a year, and when you came, I remember it was summertime, so it was
2 years maybe.
at least 2 years.
At least 2
At
years.
least 2 years.
Boy, oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know. Time does that.
It was so quick. No, it's got to be more than that because we've had COVID for 2 years. And it was way before COVID, no?
What?
That's
Yeah,
true.
probably.
Wow. That is true.
Yeah.
There you go.
So let's say 3.
It's a sin.
3 years. I know.
I know, and we're so close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Literally, you like come in and out of town, and
I'm in here
you live here. You know?
most weeks.
Yep.
So yeah.
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
good to have you back.
Yeah.
Good to be back.
It is. For any of our regular listeners, like they will probably hear us talk about you. So a lot of the listeners probably know about you. But for those who don't, how about you introduce yourself, talk about your podcast, just give a
Yeah.
little picture of who you are.
So I'm the host of the Connected Adventist podcast, which is the younger sister to the Oz Table Talk podcast. So it literally started through this podcast. So like just really impressed by the potential of podcasting. And so I decided to start my podcast. And that was, so it would be like around 3 years. Yeah, because the podcast, mine's been going for 3 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I host that and I'm the only host. I don't have a crew like you guys. And that's a weekly podcast as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I live in Gingin, a semi-rural town in Queensland. Yeah. Which is only like less than an hour from you guys. So we're pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. And we thought we would take the opportunity and get you to record with us because one, it's been ages, but also soon that is going to get a lot more difficult recording together. So you guys are going to be moving in the not too distant future.
That's the plan so far.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But everything's still a little all over the place, so I don't know how that's all going to work.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone's waiting for us to say we're not going. Like they just they know there's so much uncertainty with the move that everyone's like, you guys aren't going to be going. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, we'll see.
Well, the idea that we had, because we were thinking about, we wanted to record with you, we wanted to catch up, and so the obvious thinking, I think Dave was your idea, said, well, we've started this series on the seasons of life, and so for those of you who might have seen the one that we did on university and tertiary education, we thought, well, moving is a really significant season of life. It makes big changes happen, and so we thought it would be a good opportunity to do that, and you are the star attraction because you're actually moving.
I'm the one that's moving, so yeah.
Before we start that conversation, I
Yeah.
just wanted to give a shout out to Kat's 2 girls that recently got baptized.
Oh,
by
yes.
Naomi.
Yes.
That was such a special day.
It was
and
such a
you must have been
special
so
day.
proud of them, eh?
Yeah, it was so good. I think, as a parent, like there's just things that you always desire for your kids. And as a Christian parent, like baptism, for them to make that public commitment is one of those things where you're just like, all right, God, take us all to heaven now. Like,
We're done.
Yeah. And I've said to my girls, I'm like, this is actually more important than like when you get married. Like this is so significant, and I really wanted them to understand like how special the day was, and it really was.
Yeah, it
It was
was.
a really good day.
You must have been so proud, particularly when they were sharing their testimonies. I was like so chuffed, especially with Naomi's, because like to me, what she encapsulated with her story was the missionary family that you guys have chosen to be. Because basically like her story was, well, my mum's discipled me and my dad's discipled me and my big sister's discipled me. And I was like, that's perfect. You know, that's the way it should be. Yeah. So I was really impressed by that. So kudos
Praise
to you
the Lord.
guys.
Yeah, praise the Lord. But I must say, I think it's one of those things like, for example, I remember my mum, like she would always be like, I want you to read books. I'd never seen the lady read books. Like, and it always stuck with me because I'm like, it's so important for parents to model like the expectations that they have for their kids, whatever that looks like, whether it's academic or whether it's, in values or whether it's spirituality. And so that really stuck with me. I'm like, I can't expect my daughters to have a passion for mission if we're not involved in mission. I can't expect them to want to be participating in the church if they don't see us participating. So it was something that we were really, really like focused on doing. Hey, we're going to model everything that we would wish that your walk looks like in our own and our own experience. So yeah.
That's so cool. And it was so cool to hear from her that that's worked,
Yeah.
Because that's just her journey. That's what she knows.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was really impressed.
When they read their little speeches to us at home, I'm trying to just like, like, okay, that's cool, baby. I love it. Like, but it was really
Inside
good.
you were like,
Yeah, because it was just so authentic. I think it's conversations that you don't realize the impact that you're having on your kids. And sometimes I feel as parents, like we feel like we're doing a terrible job. And then God gives us those moments where he's like, no, you know what? Like, it's working.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Anyway, praise God.
Yeah.
That was really exciting.
It was so sweet.
So moving, hey?
Moving. Yeah.
So I think a good place to start would be tell us a little bit of the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why are you moving? Why are you leaving us, Kat? You better have a good reason.
I'm done with
I
Bundaberg.
was like, was it something
I'm
that we
going
said?
bigger and better things. It's because you didn't invite me for 2 years.
Sorry.
I'm going to go to some New South Wales podcasters.
Wait a second. Did she invite us to her podcast? in the last
It's
2
a
years?
single podcast, but I know I did. Anyway, we'll work on your interview.
That's true. Yep.
So I interviewed Matt,
Yeah.
and then that didn't get recorded, remember? You
Yeah,
actually
that's
deleted
right.
that file. So then I lost that interview, and then I did interview with you, and I've just had it sitting on my computer and just haven't done anything with it.
Yep.
Unreleasable.
Probably.
Though I'm pretty confident it's pretty good. Like,
It's long enough ago that I don't remember what I said. You're welcome to release it. Go for it.
it was 3 years ago, but from what I recall, it seemed like a pretty smooth interview.
Yeah. So two people that like to talk in an interview. How
You
bad
just
can it
can't
be?
go wrong.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong. We're bound to keep the flow going really well.
Yeah.
Oh dear. So why are you leaving us?
So why we're leaving? So my daughter there's a lot of reasons, but my daughter is moving to high school next year. And it's one of those things where we just by default thought, well, she'll just go to the high school that every other child that's gone through the Adventist primary school will go to. That was just the default. But prior to that, we'd heard a lot of things about Tweed Valley Adventist College, which is an Adventist school that is from prep through to high school. And we just heard a lot about the principal there. And I've been at a prayer conference in North New South Wales where he was actually invited to give a testimony of answered prayer. He sort of just shared of how God was blessing the school and things like that. And I was really impressed. I was like, wow, like that's so cool to have like the principal be so determined that prayer is the way that the school would grow. And going back to the blueprint for education, like there was just a whole bunch of stuff that just really stood out from that little testimony. At that time, our daughters were homeschooled, and that was what they were always going to be doing. So there was no, that's where we could send our girls when they go to school or anything. So the girls started primary school in the middle of 2020. So they've been in school for like a year and a bit. And now Chloe's going into high school. So now we're like, okay, so we'll just send her to that specific school. But in amongst all of that, like Tweed kept in my mind, but it's in another state. We're not going to do that. And then there was just another factor of like really taking into consideration like our daughters' personalities, and just being really prayerful and also discerning like, hey, what do their personalities look like in different situations and in different contexts? And so I really prayed because I've been around enough people that I can see that some kids really thrive off being in Adventist schooling. And then you get other children that as they grow up, because they don't know anything but Adventism, when they come out of that, it's like a shock to the system. And so we were really considerate about, hey, what is the best for our children? What's the best for our daughters? Because we don't know what the answer would be. Is it going to be good for them, or is it going to be bad for them to be in Adventist education all the way up to grade 12? So then we just prayed. We prayed and we prayed for a specific sign, and then God just gave us the answer to that sign. But in amongst that, COVID has just really complicated things a lot. And it's been a little rough at home because there's this like battle between do we go, or maybe now we shouldn't go because it's not going to be the best for us. And, so we're still I think that's why everyone's like, we can see that you guys could end up staying and not going anywhere last minute. So, yeah.
What I was really happy with what you were saying just then is how calculated you are in how you're approaching this decision. Like the fact that you're taking into consideration the temperaments and the personalities of your children and just weighing those options. It's like it's not a cookie cutter kind of approach that you're really trying to do what's best for individually for them, and it's not what's necessarily convenient. I think that must be really like such a challenge because, moving is stressful enough.
Yes.
And then, to do it in a way that you're adding those layers of complexity that may seem really inconvenient for you at a time, but that's it's having a lasting benefit for your kids. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And I think through my social work studying, like, it's just made me very aware of like the individuality of every person, and especially like children going through the adolescent years. Like, it's so crucial for like their character development and for the projection of the rest of their lives. Like, what happens during these crucial years in terms of like the peer support that they have, in terms of the influences, in terms of like the mentorship that they have in their lives. Like, there's just so many factors that can impact a teenager in like such severe ways that if you can try and make them as best suited for your overall purpose or whatever your overall goal is for your child, which for us as a Christian family is for them to love God with all their heart. If we can provide an environment that's going to give the best of all of that, then I honestly, I'm scared to make a decision that is wrong. And that's why we're just like, God, like, please, like, this could potentially be salvational. And I'm not saying that an Adventist school will make secure salvation for my children, but I do know that it will have a certain impact. And like I said,
because it normalizes being a believer, right? It normalizes the fact that what you believe is normal because the people around you believe the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So there's positives in around that.
Yeah. And I think too, like, in terms of like neurological development, your brain is developing up until like 20s. So if you're able to get thrown into the deep end at 18 when you finish high school, and then you have to be like, okay, really take hold of your faith. I'd rather them having to make that decision now rather than making it when they're 13 and they're having to struggle with their own like, issues like identity crisis and with insecurities and with body issues and standing out and being, a vegetarian amongst people that aren't vegetarian, or going to church on a Saturday when everyone else goes to church on a Sunday. Like, I just see like, I'm like, God, if that's not for my child, like, I'll do what I need to do to save them from having to go through that in a time when it's unnecessary.
Yeah. So my family, we moved interstate to Queensland when I was 15. And I remember at the time, when you're that age, everything is normal because you haven't had experience prior to know that it's not normal. But in hindsight, I can see that by doing that, I lost contact with my social circle, my friends that were around me. And it took me a long time to rebuild a network of people and support around me and all the rest of it after that. And, there's good and bad that comes from all of that. But I can definitely see what you're saying from my experience as well, that, when you're dealing with that at 15, 16, 17, I don't know how I would have, I don't know that I would have coped with it as well if I had to deal with it when I was 12 and 13 sort of thing. So,
And again, it's relative to different personalities.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I've seen kids that have gone, like, we've got, like the Wakelands at Gingin. They've gone through public education from day one and graduated in public high schools. And they're people that, you just see them like dedicated to serving in the church, and they have their own personal walk with God. And so there's definitely, and I think that's probably what makes it harder too, because you see both examples and you're like, okay, well, maybe they'll be fine if they go to a different faith group, a school that has a different faith group, or even if we put them in a public school, in a really good public school or whatever. I feel like there's no like textbook answer to get it right. And that's why, Oro, when you were mentioning like, we're so determined on making this a decision for our children. We've had to make it for our children and their personality, and really prayed about it. And ultimately God was the one that had to show us if that's what he wanted, because I'm so scared to make the wrong decision.
So moving's always complicated, but I think yours has been especially complicated, right? Because as you mentioned, COVID is kind of making it difficult at the moment with interstate anything. You guys have been here now for
12 years.
12 years.
Wow.
Steve runs his own business. So it's a lot to be rooting up, So I think the complexity of your move really highlights the value that you see for your children. The fact that you're even considering this, to me, just really shows that what you guys are trying to do is you're trying to do whatever's best for the girls, right, at any cost to yourselves. And I think that's really cool. But I wanted to ask you, just because we're going through this, series on seasons of life, what have been some of the hardest factors of making a challenging decision like that? with regard to moving at expenses to yourselves.
Yeah. I think for us, it probably would vary. If you would ask me and Stevie, we'd probably have very different.
Sure.
We'd have different reasons or different challenges. But honestly, to be totally honest, the hardest has been is just Stevie and I have very different personalities. And so I'm like a Peter. I'm like, Jesus doesn't even have to ask me to walk off the boat and I will do it. Like,
Yeah, I just think he might. So, and that harmonizes with I want, so I'll do that too.
Yeah, I'm like, I think that kind of looks like Jesus. I'm going to start walking anyway. Like, I'm just so different. Where Stevie's like, give me 10 signs and then I'll go.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, I just need one. Like, just need one and we'll go with that. That has been the hardest bit.
Okay.
But in saying all of that, the reason why it has been so different for us, again, back to personality. So Stevie, the way that he grew up, he had moved so many times when he was a kid. And so he honestly hates moving because he did it so much as a kid. And it was always like with really bad like circumstances around it because of the way that their family sort of was with their citizenship and stuff. So he has really bad, like it's a trigger for him even to think about moving. Where for me, I grew up in the same house from the age of 10 till when I left home. And so for me, I'm like, I love change. I love change. I thrive off change. So for me, it's like another state. Let's go. Like I'm there. But for Stevie's like, we got to move. Like I didn't want to have to move again. So it's definitely set off personal triggers and different reasons as to why we're maybe a bit more hesitant. In the last probably month where it's becoming a bit more real, I am starting to be like, you know, God, it's okay if you want us to stay in Gingin. Like I've found myself being okay with not going. And that's just been for like numerous reasons, which will tend to just tap into my own insecurities. But anyway, yes, I found myself as well sort of like trying to deal with that. But the hardest thing was knowing where God wants us, given that things around us are changing so much, and still trusting that God knew that was going to be going to happen. So there were things like at the school where we were told that the principal had resigned, and so we were like, oh, but you know, Stevie's like, well, we're not going there if Paul's not there, because you know he's the one that's God is using, and with the teachers and the staff, and you know everything could change now that Paul's not there, and so then we were like, okay, well, we're not going to go if Paul's not there, and then we found out that wasn't true because I rang the school to double check because Stevie's like, ring the school and find out because, you know, we need to find out if this is true. And so just knowing that things continue to change, but still trusting that God knew that was going to change. Like even if the principal had decided to resign, like God knew that, but he still told us to go to that school. That's the way that I see it, where Stevie's more like, no, but you know, we were going there because this was going to be the leadership and this was going to be the staff. And yeah, that's been probably the hardest for me.
And how have you guys navigated that?
We've just had some pretty good discussions.
Why do I get the feeling there's an understatement happening there?
Robust.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's robust
They were
fellowship.
very vibrant discussions. We've had to just get to that, and then
you mentioned that Steve likes to have like many signs. Have you guys as a part of that journey been asking for more evidence from God and stuff
I
like that?
haven't, but Stevie has.
Okay.
So we literally just finished praying and fasting.
Yeah.
And because we'd asked for a specific sign, but I'm not going to share it on the podcast
That's fine.
because Stevie didn't want. I mean, I don't think he really wants me to be sharing it anyway. But
Yeah,
that's
Luke
fine.
knows. But that's just because you were here. If you guys were here, you would have heard the story as well. But I did say it earlier, but. Yeah, we asked for another sign and it was like a pretty decent sign and we didn't get the answer.
Okay.
Yeah. So now Stevie's like even more frustrated because he's like, great, like we prayed and fasted for this and
No
we still
clarity.
didn't get a clear sign. Like it's still,
Yeah.
we're still in the same place as we were prior to all that.
I think
Yeah.
sometimes, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about this because when we were talking about earlier, this triggered in my mind. And I thought I'll ask that later.
Yeah.
Do you think that sometimes God allows that specifically because he wants us to wrestle with it? He wants us to come to the conclusion ourselves?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, and again, like Peter needed his character refined.
Yeah.
Like God needed him to change his personality. So I'm totally aware that there are things about me that God is like, Catalina, like just settle down. Like I'm packing and we still don't even know if we're moving. But I'm like, no, God, like I'm going to be faithful and I'm going to go through with this thing and, and I'm going to be prepared. So if it does, you do give us a clear sign, we're going. So I'm packing. Stevie's not doing anything. Stevie's like, nope. Like until I know, like I'm not going to be putting energy and so for us, I think it's been really one of those processes where Stevie has to be okay to find out last minute potentially, and then I have to be okay with potentially finding out last minute that we're staying.
Yeah.
But yet I've packed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely has been something that I think God has really used to just be like, are you really letting me be in control of this, or are you just?
So, question. If this is what this move looks like, right? This isn't the first big move that you've had. Have all of the significant moves of your life looked the same? Like, have you wrestled with similar things, or is this very unique? Like, you're having different personalities and whatever. Like, has that been something that you've had to wrestle over before, or was last time like everything just went into place and you just moved?
No, I think for us, in other situations, we had a house in Brisbane, it was like an inner city house, our first home when we got married, and we felt very impressed to move out into what we thought was like the country or bush. So we moved just out of Brisbane to 4 acres. And for us that was like, wow.
That was the bush to you.
Yeah, for us that was like crazy because we just come from like a suburban block. So when we made the decision, that was very much, yep, let's do it. We listed our house and within 7 days it had sold. So it was so clear. It was like, okay, yeah, we do have to go. But when we went from that small acreage to here, there was a lot of hesitation where I was like, but Stevie, we need to go have a look at houses. Like if we know that that's what God's calling us, like we need to travel to Tara. We went to Tara. We have to travel to Blackbutt. We have to travel to Gingin. Like we have to go and go to these areas. And Stevie's like, yeah, but So yeah, there was a bit of that. Yeah. But at the same time, we just knew that was God's will. It was so clear. It
was very clear.
Yeah. And then when we purchased this house up here, it was very clear that that's...
Did you think that was like the last move? Like, okay, we're in the country now. Like, that's it.
Okay, so when we bought our first house, we renovated that thing. Like, we were going to die there. Like, we used to joke. We're like, the ambulances are going to be taking, like, our bodies out of this house. Like, we'd made it. Like, it was...
Oh, that is really, really like, committed.
We were so committed. But our spirituality wasn't the best at that stage. So we were like, no, we're going to make this so it's our forever home and we're going to die here and, whatever. And then we moved to the next house and we're like, yeah, okay, maybe it's not going to be our forever home because the forever home wasn't the forever home. So maybe this isn't going to be it, but this is pretty close to it. And then God sent us to Gingin and we're like, yep, that's it. Like we're going to see Jesus.
Finally.
We're going to see Jesus from our deck. Like we were like convinced that this was it. And then we're moving again.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's life.
Yeah, it so is. Yeah. It so is.
I'm just interested. I mean, like this is obviously from your perspective, especially thinking this move, thinking about navigating the family and all the rest of it. You guys are still single, but you've both moved around quite a bit. Have you wrestled a lot over the moves that you've made, or for you guys being single, does it just feel like, nope, this is just skipping along chapter to chapter? Like, how has it felt for you guys?
I've never really thought twice about it.
Yeah, I would resonate with that.
Yeah.
And and I think like I can't comprehend what having those extra parameters that you have to think about with family and children. Like it's just it's not something that like registers in my mind because it's not something that I've ever had to take into consideration. Most of my stuff could fit in the boot of my car, and I just go. Like there's that movability, and I think that's really been. I've kind of always tried to take advantage of that. So as a result of that, I've never felt I've never really had to like think twice or to really wrestle too much because there wasn't so many variables that I had to think about. It was just, okay, is this the next, is this something that's going to benefit me? Is this something that's going to improve me in terms of character and skills? Then, okay, let's go. I didn't really think twice after that. After that initial consideration.
I will say potentially this season could have been more difficult. Like as in with my family being interstate, I feel that a little bit now. Whereas in the past, you just hop in the car. You know, so it didn't matter how far away I was. I could still go and visit them. Whereas, yeah, with borders being closed and stuff like that, I think if that had been the case when I was looking at moving interstate, maybe then I might have questioned it. Yeah, because I remember when I first, not when I first moved out of home, but not long after that when I moved again, I had a job offer up in Atherton Tablelands, and at the time I was like 17. Probably didn't want to be that far away from my family.
Yeah, that's like days driving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I decided against, you know, that option. But I moved somewhere else, you know, it was just closer. So it wasn't moving. It was just, I think, yeah, maybe that's a consideration. I don't know how you found that moving across from Perth.
Oh, I mean, like for me, I've always like been like away from significant distances away from my family, like not intentionally, but just circumstance.
Disclaimer. Just clarifying.
I do love you guys.
Hi, Mama. Still love you. But like, I think it was just like because my parents that lived in country towns, and then I went to uni in the city, so you know that was already a distance right there. And by the time they moved in the city, I was already wanted to explore the eastern side of Australia, and you know, and so it was just like I don't know, it's something I just gotten used to ever since high school.
Have you ever been in a position where you've had to wrestle with God for clarity about those decisions though? Because I feel, I don't know, if I was single and was still having to make a decision to move interstate, I think I still would have wanted clarity, like that's where God wanted me. Did you guys ever have situations where you're like, oh God, like I don't really know if this is the way that you want me to go?
I think, that's a really good question. Like I've just wrestling with this now, like just reflecting on my previous moves. Like whenever I've moved into a new place, I've always discovered that there was something else in terms of like what my original reason for moving. Like I discovered like, okay, this is God. So this was the real reason why you wanted me to move. So it seemed like I discovered after the fact. And it makes me wonder, maybe, do you think maybe like we over like analyze, you know, like that's something that like when I reflect on my previous move, it seems like every time I moved to a new place, I discovered, wow, if I had stayed there, I would not have learned this and this. But that was not the original reason. I just wanted to study medicine. Like I didn't know that I was gonna, you know, join this church and you know, learn all these new things and meet these new friends that you know has enriched my life. You know, like even like moving from Brisbane to Bundy, it was just more like, like this is going to be, you know, a real advantage for future career options in the future, you know, getting that rural exposure, that one-on-one teaching. I did not know I was going to be in a podcast. You know, that's
Look,
like...
And
like
the Oz Table Talk podcast, not just any podcast.
and it just made me realize it's like, wow, like God, you are just like, your ways are so much higher than our ways, you know? Like here I am just thinking like the really simple stuff, but God, you're like, no, I have something much more better for you. You know, I'm going to connect you up with people that it's going to enrich you in the future. And to me, that just blows my mind in retrospect, which I would never have even crossed my mind that was even possible. You know,
I love that. I think that often we do invest too much meaning in things. Well, we do both, right? We put too much meaning on the stuff that doesn't have that much, and we don't put enough emphasis on the stuff that does. And I think that's one of the factors that you're calling out there, just the fact that God has the capacity to use the decisions that we make for good and open those opportunities.
Absolutely.
It's almost irrelevant to where we choose to move. Obviously, you don't want to be running away from him because sometimes he does have clear things like, hey, I want you to go over there.
See how that works.
Yeah, that's right. Worked great for Jonah.
Let me show you how I'll get you to do what I planned you to do.
That's right. But I think often he has many options for us, and he relies on our decisions that he then works with and all the rest of it.
And we see that evidently in scripture. Like when you look at like the Abraham and Lot saga, like Abraham's like, you make the decision, mate. Like which one you're gonna go. Like he's not even leading with the front foot. He's like almost leading from behind, and that ended up being the best option for him without even really making a decision. And then you see that in so many other stories as well. Where like,
well, you mentioned Abraham. I was thinking about Abraham when we were talking just a bit earlier, because Abraham, he was called out of his homeland, right? And that is a far more challenging thing for him than it is for us, because from their perspective, they didn't have travel infrastructure and hospitals at every corner like we do here. Like if you go out from your community, that is essentially you putting yourself in the hands of God, because out there you don't have support. You are your own support team, if you like. And so he was called out. He went and he did that and he listened, but God didn't give him a clear coordinate. He didn't say go to this address and that's the promised land. He said, okay, come on out. And they journeyed together. And yes, he found his way to the right place, but it wasn't a direct journey. And almost never is it a direct journey in Scripture. You fast forward and look at Moses and the children of Israel when they left Egypt. That could have been a direct journey, but they made poor choices. And so that ended up being a very circuitous path as well. So it's one of those examples of how God just utilizes what's going on in our decisions as well.
It's extremely frustrating, though.
Yes.
Tell me about it.
It'd be nice, God would be like, this is the way you should walk in it. Like,
Do you think he would have gone, though? If God had have laid out the plan?
I feel like his heart. Good question. I
But,
don't know.
but
I'm
you
kind
know
of.
what? I think adding on to that, which is kind of what Luke had mentioned about, but is it for refining of character? I feel if he doesn't give you a clear go this way, walk in it, it's probably because there's a lot of refinement to do in us before he gives us a direction. He's like, let me leave you nowhere.
Yeah.
Let me leave you in a place where you got no idea where you're going. And let me work on your heart so that when I do show you, you're ready to go that path. Yeah.
I was thinking about this last night. I was reading the story of Hagar and how she left once, right? She tried to leave once. And what did God say? Go back. You're not done yet. There's something that has not yet taken place. There's something that you still need to learn. Something Sarah still needs to learn. And so, he sends her back for a good amount of time, because you see before that, Hagar is looking down on Sarai for not being able to conceive children, and yet she has done so. And then as a result of that, Sarai treats her harshly because, she's looking at me in this way, and she's giving me a hard time. And so both of the women have these character flaws, and they are rubbing each other the wrong way. And so Hagar leaves, and God says, "No, we're not done yet.
Wow.
Let's go back. You need to resolve this." And she goes back, and yes, eventually she does leave, but there's a lot of time in between, right? Like, I can't remember exactly how long, but there's at least like 13, 14, 15 years before she leaves finally at that point. But obviously God had something that was yet undone. And I think, like you say, in those scenarios where God doesn't give us clear direction, I think sometimes it's a case of he wants us to make a decision, but sometimes we're not cooked yet, right? Like there's something that he's still working on that we need to figure out.
Yeah.
We haven't necessarily touched on various reasons why people may leave, but I think one of the, I guess I can learn from experience, one of the worst reasons to ever leave is because you just find your circumstances just unfavorable. Like that's the only reason. Is if it's I just want to escape a bad situation. Of course, depends on what the situation is. But if it's just more out of convenience, and you're running away from growth, then that's usually doesn't end well.
Yeah. Well, when we were moving to Bundaberg, it was like God just closed one door after another. At the beginning of our marriage, there was all these doors open, right? We could have done this and that, with ministry opportunities and all the rest of it. And then just slowly, one at a time, close. And eventually we were just sitting there. It's like, we're done here. There's nothing left here. And there were some other factors too that made the decision even more complex, with family and that, and eventually it was just really clear. It was like, well, every door for us has shut. We've got nothing here, but in Bundaberg, doors were opening up here, left, right, and center. Even though we weren't living up here, there was stuff happening at church that we were getting involved with, and eventually we were just traveling every weekend up here, and it's like, oh, this is kind of silly. There's no good reason for this, and so here we are. But God, in hindsight, I can see there's way more stuff that God had going on there. But this podcast wouldn't have happened if we never came up here. Realistically. So there's lots of different factors that God can see that we just can't. So there's a lot of trust involved, I guess.
Yeah, and I think to add another layer to it, the parenting layer, to see our girls seeing us fast and praying. for God's guidance. Like, it has been really sweet. So we prayed, obviously it was on Monday, and that's when we asked for our last sign. But so we all went around and we all did our individual prayer. And so the girls can't wait to go to Tweed Valley. So it's gone from Chloe hated us even talking about Tweed Valley. Like, anything that we said, she'd just like shut down. And then she'd mention the school that she was going to go to and how they've got a better this and a bigger that. And it just was like this competition. And we've gone from her hating Tweed Valley or the idea of going to that school to now just being over the moon to be going. And to have the girls kneeling for prayer before we ask for this specific sign, and for them to say, God, like, we ask for you to choose where's best for us. Like, I was like, oh God, like, that was just so touching. They've gone from, we want to go to Tweed, and our family feeling like that was where God was leading us. And I mean, I still feel like that's where God's leading us, but it just was so much clearer and less complicated. And to now go to this stage where both the girls are like, wherever you choose, and please choose for us. Like, I was like, oh God, thank you. Like,
Surrender.
yeah. And I think I think that's probably where we're at as well, where Stevie was probably very determined, like, I just want to stay. Like, is it really like that's the best? And so he's in a position where he's been brought to the middle of you choose. And then for me, I'm like, you don't need to convince me anymore. Like, I'll go. I'm there. And God's like bringing me back to the middle and being like, okay, you choose. So yeah, it has been one of those experiences where we're really just, and I think back to like that, the motives, I think God has also been reminding us, like, hey, why are the reasons that you want to go? And if we're sincere about it, like, is it just for the girls? I like change, so I'm happy for change. And Stevie, is he more hesitant and resisting because he doesn't want change? So I think it's also done a lot in just trying to expose the motives of why we're for or against, or whatever it is that sort of is holding us back a little bit.
Yeah. Another story in scripture that I think is quite informative to the conversation that we're having is Jacob. So Jacob obviously fled from home initially, but then when he was thinking about moving back, he had a lot to work through, right? And so the complexity of that move for him was, I guess, a bit analogous to your situation at the moment. And I think what you've been describing is that wrestle that Jacob had to have, right? Where he was like, I can't go back there, God, unless I know that I have your blessing. And for him that took place in a very, physical manner. But essentially it was that same thing. And I wonder, one of the challenges I've found over the years with leaving somewhere and moving to somewhere else, because I guess I'm a bit like you, I like change, so I'm quite happy to up and leave. But the part that's hard is what you leave behind. And particularly, like, I know you're fairly involved in ministry in your local community, in your church family and the school and so forth. And so I think, if I was in that position, I think I would find that challenging. Has that been hard for you?
It really has, especially with the community work that we do through church and stuff. Yeah.
How have you processed that?
I when we left Brisbane, it was the same sort of thing. Like, people were like, oh, what are we going to do? Who's going to run this and who's going to do that? And we literally saw the Sheffers started coming to our church.
Right.
And they always went to like Spanish churches, and all of a sudden they showed up at Mount Gravatt. And I remember like just watching them from a distance and be like, wow, so you guys are replacing us. Like, it was so clear to us. And they literally took on every ministry that we were involved in plus some. Like, they were just like a powerhouse. Like,
Aren't they?
Yeah, and they're just so active. Like, they have the same sort of zeal of just like, let's be involved, let's help our church run and all that kind of stuff. So I just remember seeing them walking, and I'm just like, okay, so they're going to take over. And I remember I asked them, I'm like, what are you guys doing here? Because when you always go to your ethnic church, when you go out of that, it's just something's up. And they were just like, oh, we're just, going to different churches. And I'm like, you guys are going to be here, like, I can guarantee, because it was just a really good church, and we fitted in really well, and it was just a very like really close, really like intimate friendship, orientated kind of church, even though it was one of our bigger churches at the time. Yeah, I was like, no, you guys are going to love it. Like, trust me, you're not going to be leaving this. Like, we didn't leave. I know you guys aren't going to leave. And the same thing has happened now. Like, with Gin, there's just families that have started coming to our church that I'm like, oh, okay. You like health stuff? Great. You know, we have Live More Ministry. And you have people that want to take over the food pantry that our church runs. And all this sort of stuff where I'm just like, excellent. I'm like, that's so good.
That can give you peace of mind.
I have a lot of peace. But I think I still feel like there's some loose ends in terms of like Bible studies that I'm doing with people that I don't know who's going to take those on, and if there's really going to be anyone that's going to want to. So there's some bits that I'm just like, oh, like I wish there was a bit more time. Yeah.
And I think that's where, you know, we come back to the story of Abraham, right? You know, Abraham, he had lots of loose ends as well, right? Like we were informed in chapter 13 that he was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. And in chapter 12, there's mention of him having people, right? It says that he had to take the people whom he had acquired with him on this journey, right? So he was a significantly like powerful, wealthy man. And so he would have been leaving behind some things of substance in Babylon, essentially. And so I think, you know, a bit like Abraham, like one of the things we have to do is we have to just step out in faith, trusting that God will take care of that stuff, you know? And I know I find that really hard. And so I can sort of empathize a little bit with how you might be feeling about that situation. But yeah, when you sense the call of God, you know, you've got to go trusting that he'll take care of those things that, you know, you can't foresee how, you know, who's going to take over this ministry. Yeah.
And also, like, for me, like, as you were saying that, I'm like, okay, wow, like how you were saying, Ori, with like God works things out, and then you look back on it and you're like, oh, okay. So there came a position, like, to be totally honest with you, like church and ministry was always a priority as parents. Like we're like, girls, this is how we live. Like, we live church, we live community service, we live for this. And so there came a point where I felt very convicted that we were putting our daughters second to church and ministry and community service and contacts and Bible studies and events and programs.
That would be bitter pill.
Yeah. And when I saw that, I'm like, that's when we started making decisions that were more based around our daughters and not so much based around what we do as a church and in the church and all that kind of stuff. And so that's where we have homeschooling finishing. It was something that the girls had requested, and although us as parents were like, but no, you're going to graduate grade 12 and I'm going to be your principal and I'm going to give you your grade 12 certificate. And even though there was a lot of that, realistically we had to look at what the dynamics at home were like, how we were starting to get sick of each other because we were with each other all the time. And so we made that decision for them. And then with me starting to come into Bundaberg more so that the girls could go to Hinkler and St. Andrews and all that kind of stuff, like that was to prioritize them. And I feel like God was slowly like saying, please prioritize your kids because that's the important like ministry that I need you guys to have. And so for us to now be in a position where we're moving into state, I feel it's been a gradual prioritizing them above ministry, above our local church, above Bible study contacts. So yeah, I think it has been like a slow transition into making like this bigger decision. Yeah.
And I know you kind of just described this a little bit, but how much would you say changed? Like if you were to try and put a number on it, how much would you say changed when you made that shift from being church-centric to your kids?
To be totally honest, it was really painful at the beginning because one, I had to admit and be honest with myself that my kids weren't my priority. And I think as a parent, when you admit that to yourself,
failure.
You're like, okay, wow, that's super selfish. But yet it was like veiled by ministry. It was for Jesus and all that kind of stuff. And so trying to find that balance is really quite difficult. But then I got to a place where once they were at school, like you realized like you missed them, where at homeschooling you didn't, because you're like, I actually wish I could miss you. I'm like, we don't even get time to miss each other because we wake up to each other and we go to sleep to each other. So that really changed the dynamics. And then that made me see them as like, I just want to hang out with you guys. Like, how was your day? what's going on with your teachers and with your friends and what did you learn and where were you going and who's invited you where. Like it turned into such a different dynamics that I think the shift of acknowledging that we weren't putting our children first and having that time when they're at school and then I was doing my stuff. That.
Can I throw an observation at you?
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, I don't think that much has changed with regard to ministry, because even though you've made this shift in focus, right? I think what I was trying to bring out of you there is that you're still ministry focused, right? It's just now you've got your priorities straight.
Yeah.
And I think that's really beautiful because, I think, you could look at that and be like, oh, but, I still need to be serving God and whatever. When all along God was like, well, you are serving me when you're serving your children, right?
Yeah.
And because you have this missionary mindset, as a family, when in serving your children, you want to show them how to serve God, right? And so you work with them now, you know, in ministry. Yeah. And so, I mean, I've seen that and the effect of that on your children. And so I think that's a really cool example for people who are listening to this to sort of follow, to be like, you know what, to prioritize my family doesn't mean to shelve God. You know? It means to get my priorities straight so that we are serving God, but in a way that's sustainable.
Yeah. And I think too, for me, like when I look at a lot of like the essence of my personality, like I've never been really career focused. Like, to be totally honest with you, I've never been like that, but that's just because of the way things worked out. let me not do that joke. But anyway, because I met Stevie at such a young age, like there was just kind of no need for me to to have a career. Because anyway,
you were going to be a principal.
It's okay. I can relate. I met Sarah when she was 17. It was the same thing.
I'm like, Stevie's just working anyway, so I don't really need to do anything with my life. But anyway, so I've never been really like super career focused, although I love having my career. Like I love learning, but it's not like, oh, I must be this and that.
Sure.
But when I would often get people say, oh, but as a woman, like being a mother is a ministry. And that would always kind of grind on me because I'm like, yeah, I get it. That's fine. But I know what it's like being a mother day in, day out. And I struggled to see not so much the importance of the value or whatever it is. I struggled seeing like that as ministry. Like it was two separate things, although I totally understand the influence that parents do have, like that the parents are the first teachers and all that kind of stuff. So I totally get it. But it just never sat with me well. Like I'm like, there's ministry and then there's parenting. But for me, honestly, like I feel like I've come to a stage in my parenting where I see my daughters becoming adults. I see them like taking hold of the things that they value and pushing back on the things that they don't like. And that got me to a point where I'm like, okay, am I really investing the best of me in these little souls who are going to be the most important souls that can ever love Jesus because of my influence? And that scared me. Like that scared me because I'm like, no, we weren't in a position where we had the best bond or we had the best relationship because of the dynamics of how we had chosen to live our life. So now, like, I honestly see that as like my best ministry because I see the affection that I have for my own children and to know that they will love Jesus because they somehow saw Jesus through me. Like that's it. Like I'm done. Like
retired.
I'll hand over.
Ready for translation, people.
I'll hand over all my Bible study contacts and my podcast and all my other ministries. I'll hand it all over for that. Like I'll trade it up for that. But that's because I think I've gotten to a point where I realize like my kids aren't kids. Like they're turning into adults who are going to choose to either be Christians or not. And I don't want the responsibility on me that I don't want to be a Christian like you were.
It reminds me of the experience of Enoch. Enoch, where like as soon as he has that first child, like his walk with God just like skyrockets and God's like, come on, mate.
I got 7 billion of those.
What are you saying? She's not moving to Tweed.
Translation.
Boy. I don't need to see Canaan. Just take me right up to heaven.
Mwoomba is not your promised land.
Maybe. I'm at a stage where I'm like, I don't know what is. Just go straight to translation. That'll do. Yeah.
So I just have a question there. I feel like we've covered a lot of really cool things. I'm actually really stoked for a lot of places this conversation's gone. But I was thinking we've spoken a lot about the...
But
But we still haven't covered something. We've
There's
covered
one thing,
20
but-
different things.
Well-
There's one more we haven't.
Virtually everything that we've spoken about is in the making of the decision and the actual, okay, we're leaving. We haven't talked about what's on the other side of that wall. And so I know you have not there yet for this move, but you've moved before and you guys have certainly moved before. But when you land somewhere, what have you found to be the most important things or like to get integrated into where you are? Oh, you're excited over there. All right.
Whoa, all right. He's like,
All right.
don't even finish the question.
Yeah, that's right. I can see
Buzz.
the face. You're like, shut up, Luke. Just let me talk. Like,
Honestly, if I could recommend this to every single person, whether church or unchurched, it's find a church.
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if you're an atheist. Just find a church.
It's a massive advantage.
Just make it a Christian church.
Because like when you ingratiate yourself into a church and
Yeah.
and you find a church that's homely, welcoming, and you're really settled in, it just makes life so much easier. You don't feel alone. It's not that sense of isolation. You feel part of like almost the fabric of the community already. And honestly, like I feel so blessed knowing the kind of advantages I've had because of that. And when I don't want to compare myself, but when I compare myself with other people with a similar situation and they haven't gone to church route, I've seen that it's a struggle. It's a really, really bad struggle, especially if you're like an international student or, you're just coming to a place where it's just everything is so unfamiliar. And just, I think one of the advantages of being part of a worldwide church especially is that really everyone's family. And I've really felt that personally in my life, and it's a massive difference.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And I think you do it very well. Like you are extremely gifted as far as weaving yourself into a church family. Like you came here once when you were still studying, and then when you graduated, and you've come back for this season. Both times you landed running. Like anything that needed to happen in the church, like you were helping this person, you were doing that, you were singing for song service. It was just like there was nothing. You didn't feel that any job was beneath you. You didn't feel like there's nothing that. There was no barriers, right? You treated the church like you belonged there. And so therefore everyone in the church goes, man, he belongs here. You know what I mean? And I love that. And, we've just wrapped up nominating committee at church, and your name's on a lot of different things because you're willing, right? You're willing to serve the people that are around you. And you are probably one of the most time-pressured, busy people whose name is on that list, and yet you're still happy to serve in a bunch of different ways. And so I think when you land anywhere, if you land there in a church community with a service mindset, it just happens. It really does. I'm a big proponent of that myself. I 100% agree. When we moved up here, like I said, doors for us to be involved were open before we even got here. And I've had a break from teaching, the Bible study for Sabbath school. I've had a break for this quarter. It's the first break I've had since we moved here. I think the first quarter that I was here, I didn't teach, and the next quarter I was asked to start teaching. And I'm pretty sure I've been a teacher, so for like 6 years or something like that. This is the first break I've had. And so, but that's because we arrived because we wanted to help. That was just the way it is. And so I think if you arrive with a consumerist mindset where, well, I'm going to sit back and I'm not going to engage, I'm not going to serve others, then you kind of get what you paid for, right? Like you're not engaging in the community, so you're not going to receive the same sort of blessings that you do when you actually get engaged and involved. So yeah, I'm with you, man.
And I think also that to add to that, I think sometimes when you don't come, and I get it, like sometimes we're guarded. Sometimes we carry baggage with us. We've been hurt by the churches, so we come into a new church, we're like, all right, who's going to be the one that's going to stab me in the back more times? And so we come with that. But at the same time, I think when we see someone who has a greater level of desire to be involved, like leaders pick up on that, and they're like, okay, so this person's come because they're ready. And so that will also affect a lot of how people respond to you, depending on how you come. And if you are in a position where you just don't want to do anything, maybe you're burnt out or whatever it is.
That's a real thing too.
Yeah, people can sort of read that as well. So but it does. I think a healthy church also, like Laura's experience, I think it testifies of the church. If we can be that church for people when we see someone new come, whether they look guarded or not, whether they look like they've had a bad experience or not, like let us still be the welcoming church, so that it can be said, hey, at least they tried to welcome me, but I just wasn't ready, or that's not what I was there for. But yeah.
I think another thing when we move is that it's very easy to carry baggage, like you were saying, from the our previous life, you could say. And I think it takes a lot of intentionality on our part to try to make a fresh start, because ultimately you're carrying yourself with you. It doesn't matter where you go. If you're broken, you're going to be broken at location A as well as you are at location B. So we have to recognize that we can't run by moving. But sometimes if our external circumstances aren't good, then it is an opportunity to change. And so we shouldn't bring the baggage with us. If we can leave it behind, leave it behind. So,
And I will add, like, back to this motives and desire of moving. So I've wanted to move to North New South Wales for as long as I can remember.
You've always been going on about how it's such a great place. I really want to go there.
So I've had to sit with God and be like, is it convenient that the best school that your girls can go to is the one that's in the conference that you want to be in? So I've had to work through that. But one of the things which touches on this whole deal of church and stuff like that, one thing that I will say, that from the moment I left Brisbane, I have missed hanging out with people my age. If anyone knows Gin, like 60-70% of the membership is old enough to be my grandparents. So I've really missed that. And I can honestly tell you, one of the biggest things that I was looking forward to for North New South Wales is to be around young people who are mission focused. And so my heart has longed for that for 12 years. And so I had to really sit with that. And so what does it look like at the end when we moved to Murwillumbah? God has been very clear in saying, Catalina, like, don't get your expectations too high. Like, don't think that what you haven't had here for 12 years is what you're going to get when you move there. And so I've had to work through a lot of that stuff, because deep down inside, there's this idea of like, oh, well, we're going to be in a young church, and, there's going to be more people, and they're all going to be like same sort of mindset as like what I am and whatever. And God's like, maybe not. And so I've had to really sit with the reality that, Catalina, the same thing you've had for 12 years, you could potentially have in North New South Wales, wherever.
They're people too.
And so God's like, please don't make this about what you think you're going to get over there, because it may not be. And then are you okay with, we still came here for the school? Like, if that's the real motive, if that's the core of why you
check your motives.
God's like, well, and not even so much check my motives, but don't be disappointed. Don't be disappointed when it's exactly the same as what it is here. So that's been another thing that I've had to sort of work through, at least on my part.
That's cool. Well, from anyone else have any specific things to throw in? Anything you think we've missed? I got ridiculed for throwing in something we missed, so if anyone else wants to, I figure now's the time.
I mean, it's been a good conversation, but nah, it's all good. I'm happy.
Cool. Well, all right. We will wrap this one up. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Hope you enjoyed exploring this topic. We look forward to catching you guys next week. In the meantime, if you have enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you can like, comment, and subscribe below this video. We look forward to hearing from you there. God bless.
You're